So let's go back. So Amir Razak asks, what if Anakin was trained as a Sith from childhood instead of being taken by the Jedi? Which is, I love this question. This is a great question. Yo, shout out to Steven. I'm sending you virtual love for pointing that out, my man. All right, we're back in business, everyone. So, Sidious finds Anakin. Let's say we're going to assume that Sidious finds Anakin at the same time that Qui-Gon found Anakin. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan found Anakin, which was 32 BBY, right? So at that point in time, Anakin is 9 years old. So let's say instead of Qui-Gon finding Anakin, Sidious finds Anakin on Tatooine. He's a 9-year-old boy. And at that point, Sidious is going to raise him and train him as his Sith apprentice moving forward. So again, Anakin's only 9 at this point, which means Sidious would have still needed someone to utilize as an assassin or as an apprentice until Anakin comes of age. So he would have needed to have someone that he can use to continue plotting and scheming to bring the Sith Grand Plan to fruition. The Sith Grand Plan was the plot that basically, and plan that Darth Bane had created a millennia, 1,000 years before, that basically was, hey, we can only have 2 Sith at any given time. We need to operate in the shadows, unbeknownst to the Jedi and to the Republic. We're going to work to corrupt and bring the Republic down from within, and at the same time, hopefully topple the Jedi so that we can have Sith dominance across the galaxy once again. So that's what Sidious and that's what all the Sith before him have been working to do. So Anakin at that point, he's too young. He's not trained in the Force at 9 years old. So Sidious would have still needed to have trained him and utilized someone else until Anakin became old enough and became strong enough in the Force. So let's assume that pretty much what we see in The Phantom Menace still happens outside of Qui-Gon finding Anakin. Instead, it's Sidious that finds Anakin, but still Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan duel Darth Maul. Qui-Gon is killed. Obi-Wan chops Darth Maul in half. And so Sidious would have needed to utilize someone else to be able to continue working to bring the Sith Grand Plan to fruition. So we know that from the Tales of the Jedi that by the time of 32 BBY, by the time of The Phantom Menace, Dooku had already begun building a relationship with Darth Sidious, and the two of them, Sidious basically was starting to mold Dooku into his apprentice at that point. He knew he had Darth Maul, but hey, Dooku's a very valuable asset to me as well, and if something happens to Darth Maul, I could lean on Dooku, which was the case, right? So I think even if Sidious found Anakin, raised him, he still would have utilized Dooku as his apprentice, at least for a certain amount of time. I don't think it would have been as long as, because how old is Anakin? So he's 9 and 32 BBY. That would have made him about 20-ish, 19, 20-ish, something around there. I can't remember the exact year that Anakin was born. So he would have been born in 41 BBY. So yeah, we'll say Anakin is about 21-ish, 22 maybe. So somewhere around 20. I think if Sidious had raised him, Anakin could have become a Sith assassin and apprentice probably before then, probably in his teenage years. Remember, Anakin is one of the strongest Force users in galactic history. He had one of the highest midichlorian counts. So typically, the Sith they sort of cheat in a way. They lean on their emotions and are able to kind of generate more force power than you see Jedi. That's why a lot of times we see Sith dueling 2 Jedi as if it's nothing, or Palpatine dueling 4 Jedi as if it's nothing, right? But it's kind of a cheap way and a fast way to get those skills. So 20-year-old Anakin you could make the argument that, hey, and in 20-year-old Anakin, his force powers in Revenge of the Sith, you could make the argument that, hey, training under Sidious is a good chunk of his life. Maybe Anakin reaches that same sort of power and potential by age 15 or 16 or 17. I think that's very much a reasonable argument that could be made. And because of that, Dooku could then wind up finding himself on the outs before we see Anakin kill him in Revenge of the Sith. So at some point, Anakin would have been strong enough and he would have become Sidious's right-hand man, right? So I think Order 66 is still going to happen as Sidious planned, but no Anakin Skywalker as a Jedi, which means that he doesn't tell Mace that Sidious is a Sith Lord, which then that becomes very interesting, because if Mace is not aware that Sidious is a Sith Lord, what winds up happening to Mace? What winds up happening to Saesee Tiin, Agen Kohler, Kit Fisto? Do they survive Order 66? Right? I think most fans are saying, hey, Mace Windu probably survived Order 66, even if right now in canon, Mace Windu is technically dead. But in this scenario, you could make the argument that, again, if Anakin is not a Jedi, that Mace Windu and those other 3 Jedi are not made aware of Palpatine as a Sith Lord. Maybe they survive Order 66. Maybe some of them survive Order 66. So now this is where it becomes interesting, because if Anakin isn't found by the Jedi, but rather Sidious, that means that Anakin would not have met Padme. So there's no relationship that Anakin would have had with Padme, because most likely Sidious would have hid Anakin from basically the world, the galaxy at that point, kind of like what he did with Maul. No one knew about Maul until Maul finally revealed himself to Qui-Gon and to Obi-Wan on Tatooine. So I think Sidious would have done the same thing with Anakin. So that means he would not have had a relationship with Padme. If those two don't meet and they don't fall in love, we don't get a Luke and a Leia. So without a Luke and a Leia, that then brings up another interesting thing to consider, which is Luke and Leia are essentially born to bring balance to the Force. It's not a coincidence that, hey, right as these 2 powerful Sith Lords are rising and the dark side is basically consuming the galaxy, at that same time, 2 eventually powerful light side dark Force users in Luke and Leia are born, so that they could eventually rival that dark side power from Darth Sidious and Darth Vader. So if those 2 aren't born, the Force would have done something to try to bring balance back to the galaxy, right? Balance in the Star Wars galaxy is essentially, for lack of a better term, the light side being the dominant power across the galaxy, not the dark side. So even if there's no Luke and Leia, the Force would have been working to bring someone to be able to eventually oppose Sidious and Vader. And so if it's not Luke and Leia, who could that be? Could it be a Jedi Knight that we know and love from the Clone Wars? Could it be someone like Mace Windu or Kit Fisto? Could it be some other Jedi? So that's where it becomes interesting, because the Force would have definitely have been working to bring about some other beings that could have opposed Sidious and Vader. The other thing too is, not only if there's no Luke and Leia to oppose Vader and Sidious, but the other thing to think about too is, if there's no Luke, then who's going to defeat Sidious and kill him on the Death Star? Well, presumably kill him in the second Death Star, right? Because the whole reason why Vader, or Anakin at that point, he's technically has come back to the light side. The whole reason that Anakin is redeemed and he saves Luke or kills Vader, kills Sidious, is to save Luke, because he had that love for his son and he wanted to save his son, and Luke was able to push him back towards the light side. If there's no Luke, There's no one to theoretically push Vader back towards the light side. There's no one that would presumably make Vader want to kill Sidious, other than maybe Vader wanting to kill Sidious to take the mantle of Sith Master. So there's a strong possibility that if Anakin was raised by Sidious instead of the Jedi, the Sith could have wound up controlling the galaxy for an even longer period than they wind up controlling the galaxy. So the Sith under Sidious and Vader controlled the galaxy for roughly 23 years, which is a pretty lengthy time. But again, if Luke and Leia are not around to oppose them, the Sith could have controlled the galaxy for several more decades, possibly longer at that point. And if Sidious is not able to live eternally like he planned, maybe Vader eventually kills him and then again takes that title of Sith Master, and then is just continuing to prolong the Empire's rule and the Sith's rule of the galaxy. I think either way, the Force would have been working to bring balance to the galaxy, because that's something we see time and time again, that the Force is working to always keep the galaxy in balance. So at some point, I think there would have been a being born. If they weren't born during the time of the Clone Wars, eventually a being would have been born, or two beings would have been born, or maybe more, that would have been able to oppose Sidious, oppose Vader, or oppose the Sith as they're controlling the galaxy. And going back to what I mentioned before about Mace Windu, Saesee Tiin, Aegon Kohler, and Kit Fisto surviving Order 66, again, maybe one of them or another Jedi that survives the Great Jedi Purge would replace Luke and Leia as the beings that the Force basically brought into existence to oppose Vader and Sidious, which is interesting to think about. Because again, a lot of fans, we assume that Mace Windu survived, but it would be cool if we knew, for a fact, hey, he did not duel Sidious, he survived Order 66. I also think that Obi-Wan would have still survived the events of Order 66, and maybe he still duels Vader on Mustafar without having that relationship with his master, and not having that bond between Obi-Wan. There's a very real possibility that Vader winds up beating Obi-Wan in this scenario and doesn't have to turn into basically a cyborg. A lot of the reason why Vader lost his duel with Obi-Wan is because he allowed his emotions to basically hold him back. And Obi-Wan was basically taking a defensive sort of strategy with that duel. So there's the possibility that if you take that emotion out of the equation, because they don't have that past, they don't have the history of being master and apprentice, that maybe Vader murks Obi-Wan. And if that's the case, we don't get a cyborg Darth Vader, which then think about what type of Sith Vader could have been, right? Even if Sidious found Anakin instead of the Jedi, I think a lot of what we see happen in Star Wars and in the Clone Wars, and a good chunk of what we see happen during the reign of the Empire still happens. But I think the big difference is that Luke and Leia aren't born. Maybe Padme gets to live. That's something else to consider, because if Anakin doesn't fall in love with Padme, he's not going to have that emotional tie to her, and maybe she would get to live, and maybe she would wind up taking on a leadership role in the Rebel Alliance as opposed to Leia. And maybe Vader beats Obi-Wan on Mustafar, as I mentioned, but ultimately I think the big thing is that eventually the Force would have willed two individuals or a single individual to be born, so that they would eventually be able to oppose Vader and Sidious, and hopefully bring an end to Sith dominance. A lot of possibilities, though, and I'm very intrigued by the possibility of what could have been if we got an Anakin raised by Sidious since childhood, since age 9. It would be very interesting to see. All right, temporary name. Glad you're joining us. Glad someone recommended the stream to you. Happy that you're here. Panthera. Glad you're joining the chat. I think that the Clone Wars would have been way worse. Yeah, you could make the argument that maybe the Clone... Well, here, let me actually play devil's advocate here for a second. If Sidious had Anakin in his back pocket the entirety of the Clone Wars, would the Clone Wars have still gone on as long as they did? I think so. I think they would have, because the reason that the Clone Wars went on for the amount of time that it did was Sidious needed it to. Sidious needed for that conflict to seem like it was never ending, so that he can allow the Senate to give him more and more executive powers, so that eventually, when the time was right, he could do exactly what he did in Revenge of the Sith. Initiate Order 66, claim that the Jedi are trying to take over the galaxy, use his executive powers, and basically make himself emperor and bring about the Empire. I think the Clone Wars would have gone on just as long as they did in canon. I don't know if they would have been as worse. They probably would have been just as bad as they were. Maybe a little bit worse if you've got Darth Vader running the show as opposed to Dooku and Grievous, but maybe they wind up being just as bad as they were. All right. Let's move on to our next question. And this comes from Raz Elite, who asks, do you think a new Star Wars movie is going to be announced soon, possibly at Celebration? Love this question, and I was super excited to be able to talk about this. So the rumors that Raz Elite is referring to stem from a recent article released by the Hollywood Reporter. And in that article, it was stated that Disney is expected to announce a new Star Wars film at Star Wars Celebration in London, which is happening in April. The Hollywood Reporter is usually a pretty good source for news and rumors. If you see the Hollywood Reporter sharing news and rumors, usually those are pretty accurate. So I would say that it's very likely at this point that we're going to get some kind of Star Wars film announcement at Celebration. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know exactly what film is going to be announced or what series of films are going to be announced, because the article didn't specify. Just basically said that there is going to be some sort of announcement at Celebration. With that said, I'm tempering my excitement, because even if a film is announced, at this point in time, Lucasfilm's track record with announcing projects only for those projects to be scrapped is not very good. We recently had the Patty Jenkins Rogue Squadron film that was announced only for it to be squashed, and then it was on again, and then it was apparently it's squashed again. I don't know what's going on with Rogue Squadron, but at this point, I would say that film, the likelihood that it's being made is probably next to zero. I don't want to say it's impossible, but at this point, it is looking like that film is not happening. At the same time that film was initially announced, we got an announcement of a Lando series being made, which I wound up looking this up because I hadn't heard a single thing about Lando. Couldn't tell you the last time I heard any sort of rumor regarding Lando. Just a few weeks ago, I found some rumors swirling that series is done. It's kaput. It's not happening. So that's two from basically the same big announcement that we got with all those shows and the Rogue Squadron film. Those are two projects from that big announcement that were announced that are not happening. We also got the Rian Johnson trilogy that was announced and is very clearly not happening. It's not in any stages of development, even if Rian Johnson says that he's still down to make those films. We also got the Benioff and Weiss films that were announced that they were supposed to create a series of films, and then that got scrapped. Benioff and Weiss, for those that are unfamiliar with those two, they are the gentlemen behind the series, the HBO show Game of Thrones. Let's also not forget that originally there was supposed to be a Boba Fett and Obi-Wan standalone film. They each were going to have their own standalone films. Those were scrapped after Solo. Solo didn't do as well as Lucasfilm would have liked, so they almost immediately scrapped the Boba Fett standalone film and the Obi-Wan standalone film. Luckily, those were recycled into The Mandalorian and then into the Obi-Wan series, respectively. So yeah, at this point, Lucasfilm's track record, they have not done a good job at announcing projects and seeing those projects through to completion. I shouldn't say they haven't done a good job, because when we got that big like Disney Day announcement with all those shows and the Patty Jenkins Rogue One Squadron, a lot of those we've got several of those that are premiered. We have several that are going to premiere this year. We've got shows that are going to premiere next year. So a lot have, but Lucasfilm has definitely jumped the gun with their announcements before seeing them to completion. So, I'm cautiously optimistic, we'll say, with this announcement. What bums me out is when I got this question, I started thinking about it, and Danielle and I had a conversation about it. And one of the things that we were discussing that dawned on me was that a lot of times the theme or the connective tissue between these projects and why they are getting scrapped tends to be some sort of issue, or some sort of, like, I don't want to say fanfare, that's not the right word, but a lot of times it's some sort of issue with the creator or that Lucasfilm is having with one of their releases, and then they immediately kind of like backtrack on some of their products. So I say this because think about the Rian Johnson trilogy. People lost their minds with The Last Jedi, and then when it was announced that he was going to do a trilogy, people lost their minds, and then Lucas backpedaled on that. The Benioff and Weiss trilogy that they were going to make, the Game of Thrones creators, Season 8 of Game of Thrones was absolutely shredded by Game of Thrones fans, and then Lucasfilm backpedaled with them. Patty Jenkins, the Wonder Woman sequel, absolutely tanked and was trashed. Lucasfilm then started backpedaling with Patty Jenkins and Rogue One, Squadron. Then, as I mentioned before, with Solo, I love Solo, and I think a lot of fans do appreciate Solo, but it didn't get the numbers that Lucasfilm wanted to. So because of that, Obi-Wan and the Obi-Wan standalone film and the Boba Fett standalone films were scrapped. So that seems to be a recurring theme with Lucasfilm. They're very adverse to taking risks. I'm a big New York Yankees fans, and the New York Yankees kind of operate the same way. They're very averse to taking risks. They want to go for surefire bets, and I feel like that's how Lucasfilm is starting to get. They want to make sure that they are not striking out with any of their creative decisions in their projects. So I think a lot of the projects that are getting scrapped tend to be because there's some sort of controversy or some sort of issue that's making Lucasfilm kind of backpedal. Bullrun, welcome to the chat, my man. So as far as I know, Rian Johnson has said that he still wants to do the Star Wars trilogy, and I believe he did start working on it. I think like when it was announced, he and I can't remember the guy's name that he is basically like his writing partner. They started working on their next series of films, but I don't know. I feel like it's a very convenient reason that both Rian Johnson and the Benioff and Weiss guys, their reasons for not moving forward with Star Wars is because of scheduling conflicts. That seems to me a very, very we'll say it seems like it's a coincidence to me that Lucasfilm is canceling those, or I shouldn't say canceling, those projects are being put to the back burner because of scheduling conflicts. To me, that seems like a very easy way out for all involved with that party. But yeah, I'm going to say that if a new series of films or a new film gets announced at Celebration, I'm going to be excited. I've mentioned this before. The motto that I live by with Star Wars is any Star Wars is better than no Star Wars. I don't care if it's something that I don't really like. To me, I would rather have that than literally no Star Wars, because I will find something that I will appreciate and like about whatever it is, whether it's a book, comic, show, or a movie. So to me, whatever gets announced, if there is an announcement at Celebration, I'm going to be super, super excited. So there is the possibility, we have been hearing rumors that Disney is planning to, so going back to that Hollywood Reporter article, they mentioned that in that article, Disney is basically saying, hey, Marvel, you need to pump the brakes on the MCU's output of films and shows. You're putting out too much content. Star Wars, on the other hand, it seems like the opposite is going to be happening, according to the Hollywood Reporter article. And so two names that I've been hearing a lot for the last 6 months to a year. Well, more Taika Waititi is one that we've been hearing for a while. A name that we've been hearing more recently is Damon Lindelof. So Taika Waititi, he has created some really cool films. I love Taika Waititi. He's a really great filmmaker and director. He's done Thor Ragnarok, Thor Love and Thunder, Jojo Rabbit, which is a phenomenal film, What We Do in the Shadows. He's a really great writer and a great filmmaker. So I think him getting to write a film or a series of film in Star Wars, I would be super excited about that, super pumped. Damon Lindelof, he has worked on, he was the showrunner for Lost. He co-created The Leftovers, which is a series that was on HBO. He co-wrote the screenplay for Ridley Scott's film Prometheus, which is a prequel to Alien, which is a dope film. He also created the series Watchmen, which is spectacular. Cannot recommend Watchmen enough, especially if you're a comic book fan. It is so freaking good. So yeah, he the stuff that he's worked on, has done some really great things, and I think he would be a great addition as a creator for Star Wars. And I think at the end of the summer or maybe in the fall, there was a lot of rumors circulating that Damon Lindelof was basically put in a writing room with a bunch of writers to come up with ideas for Star Wars films. So I say this all because, guys, where there's smoke, there's fire. I do think that we are going to get some sort of announcement at Celebration for film plans that Lucasfilm has. I want Lucasfilm to get away from the Skywalker saga and get away from that time period, especially for films. I would love if we could get a series of films based on the Old Republic or the High Republic. I would even be okay with going beyond the sequel trilogy if it's something kind of like what we saw in the Ninth Jedi in Star Wars Visions. But I want the new, whatever films, I would like for Lucasfilm to get away from the Skywalker saga and that time period. When Rogue Squadron was announced, again, I was like, yeah, I'll watch it. But it was by far one of the projects I was the least excited about. Pilots have never been my jam. And again, I kind of want, for films, I want Lucasfilm to start to get away from that time period, the Galactic Civil War, because we've spent so much time during that era that I would love for Lucasfilm to create something that takes place in the Old Republic or something that takes place in the High Republic. I think that would be great. So Bull Run says Taika Waititi film hasn't even come out yet and nobody said it wasn't canceled. So that's my problem with it. So yeah, the Taika Waititi rumors, that was there were rumors circulating a year and a half. It's got longer than a year. One of the first videos that I ever made for this channel was a video about Taika Waititi rumor that he was going to be creating a Star Wars film. So this year marks, is it 2 years? 3 years. 3 years that I've been doing the channel. So yeah, that's 3 freaking years ago that we had some inklings of Taika Waititi potentially creating a Star Wars film. So I think that could be the possibility. It seems more likely, though, that Damon Lindelof might be the one that gets the nod. If we're going by recent rumors and the fact that it was rumored that he was actually writing something with several writers. We haven't really heard that with Taika Waititi, but I would be A-okay with either one. High Stakes says, I would love to see an Old Republic era Star Wars show or movie. I could not agree with you more, High Stakes. I would love that. I would love, let's get a Darth Bane series or a Darth Bane series of films. Let's get a Plagueis film, a show. We can go even further back in time. Let's get Darth Revan. Darth Revan is canon. Let's explore Darth Revan. Let's just explore Exar Kun, who's canon. Let's explore some awesome Sith that fans really know and love. Or hey, hell, I would be okay with Lucasfilm saying, hey, we're going to go into the Old Republic or the High Republic, or maybe something in between the Old Republic and the High Republic, and we're going to introduce a new Sith. I would be A-okay with that. It doesn't have to be, the same sort of Sith that we know and love from the Old Republic, but couldn't agree with you more, High Stakes. I would love an Old Republic series or an Old Republic film or series of films. I think that would be really fun. I think Lucasfilm is going to take some of the MCU playbook, and they're going to be, we're seeing it now with the Disney Plus series. They're all tying into each other. The comics are tying into the shows, and the books and the novels are tying into the shows and the comics. So I really think that Lucasfilm is going to be taking a page out of the MCU. And it wouldn't shock me in the slightest if a series of films are announced if it's going to be in the High Republic. So Bullrun asks, what about the High Republic connected to the Old Republic, which they definitely are doing? Yeah, we've gotten some stuff. It kills me when people rag on the High Republic, because there have 100% been some drops about the Old Republic within High Republic stories and High Republic content, and mentions of ancient Sith. So yeah, we could definitely get something where it's set. It doesn't have to be the High Republic. It doesn't have to be the Old Republic. Maybe it's somewhere in between. That would be dope. So yeah, I think that's the beauty of Star Wars at this point. Even though it's a one linear timeline, unlike the MCU that has infinite timelines, the one thing that Star Wars has going for them is, hey, we could go back thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of years, or go forward thousands of years or hundreds of years, and be able to create a unique and a fun story, and maybe bring some characters that people already know and love, or create some new characters. But yeah, I do think that when we most likely get an announcement at Celebration, I think it's going to be probably something related to the High Republic would be my guess, and I would be for that. All right. Let's move on to our next question. So, Isan Sendagir, I hope I pronounced that name correctly. My apologies if I did not, asks, do you think Lucasfilm will release another Star Wars movie like Revenge of the Jedi instead of saying Revenge of the Sith? So, fun fact, Lucasfilm almost released Return of the Jedi. Not Return of the Jedi, Revenge of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi was initially titled Revenge of the Jedi. And so the story goes that Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote Return of the Jedi with George Lucas, he claims that he told Lucas that Return of the Jedi was a weak title. So Lucas had named the film Return of the Jedi. Kasdan said, hey, bro, this is a weak title. You got to come up with something better. Lucas decided to change the name of the film to Revenge of the Jedi. The original teaser trailer for the film actually used the name Revenge of the Jedi. And in December 1982, Lucas decided that revenge was not appropriate as a term, as a true Jedi should not seek revenge. And then he brought back the original title of Return of the Jedi. What's wild is by that point, thousands of Revenge of the Jedi teaser posters had been printed and distributed, but Lucasfilm stopped the shipping of those posters and sold the remaining stock of 6,800 to Star Wars fan club members for $9.50. So yeah, you could see these posters. You could buy these posters. Original copies of this poster go for like insane money. So yeah, so the fact that Lucas did name Return of the Jedi, at least for a hot minute, Revenge of the Jedi, but then said, hey, a true Jedi, someone that's a true lightsider and a Jedi would never seek revenge. So that's the key here. Because of that, I don't think anyone at Lucasfilm or Disney would ever greenlight a project with the title Revenge of the Jedi, unless it was maybe like a comic and it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, maybe then, but even then I think that that's very unlikely. I think, you know, the people that work at Lucasfilm, especially folks like Dave Filoni who got to work with Lucas, they would never wanna, I don't want to say dishonor Lucas because that's not the term that I'm going for, but they wouldn't want to, you know, go against something that George Lucas had said was, you know, hey, a true Jedi is not going to seek revenge. So yeah, I think that would be unlikely. Bullrun asks, are you going to Celebration? Bro, I wish I could go to Celebration. It's so expensive. And my Danny girl and I, we usually take around our anniversary, we take off usually about a week or 2 weeks and go on some sort of vacation. So to do that on top of Celebration would just be too much. At some point, I want to go to a Celebration. I have never been to one. They look insane. Like, those are my people. I feel like I should be at Celebration. But yeah, I haven't had the chance to go yet. If I do, though, it's probably going to wind up being somewhere in America, because I think traveling, because I would 100% cosplay. Like, I have cosplay outfits. I have lightsabers. I would want to dress up. I would want to rock my lightsabers. And I feel like it'd be an absolute pain in the ass to take those overseas. Plus, I would buy so much stuff. So taking that stuff home would be an absolute pain. But yeah, at some point I'm going to make it to Celebration. Don't know when it's going to happen. I just saw that sadly there's not going to be a Celebration in 2024. So the next one will be in 2025. Maybe that one will be kind of closer to me and I won't have to travel all that far. New York City would be dope. I'm in New York, so that would be awesome if I could go to Celebration in New York, but I don't think New York is going to happen anytime soon. All right. So for our last question, Applegrip asks, did Anakin ever come to Padme's funeral, or did he even know that Padme was dead already? Initially, I was like, do I want to answer this question? Because I feel like it's kind of well known, the answer. But then I was like, hey, you know what? The Anakin attending the funeral, some people might not know about whether Vader attended, and if he didn't, why he didn't attend. So I thought, yeah, let's answer it. So let's start out by first saying Vader was well aware that Padme died. Remember, we see in Revenge of the Jedi, after Vader gets his armor, he awakes, right, from his procedure. Or I shouldn't say he awakes, because that mother effer was freaking awake during the entirety of that procedure. But anyway, he comes to, he's in his full armor now, and he asks Sidious, hey, what's going on with Padme? Where is she? And Sidious tells Vader that in his anger, he wound up killing her, right? And of course, he's doing that to manipulate Vader, right? But even though my thought would be Sidious doesn't know with 100% certainty that Padme's dead. We as an audience, we know. I'm trying to think. I don't think at that point in the film Padme had died yet, but we know she's going to die. So I think Sidious was not 100% sure that she had died at that point, and was basically using her death as a way to manipulate Vader. Even if he knew, which makes a ton of sense because Padme was a very well-known politician, a former queen of Naboo, it would make sense that her death would get around very easily. Sidious tells Vader that Padme is dead. So we get this gem of a moment. I cannot tell you guys, let's make this bigger. I can't tell you how often I use this GIF. I cannot tell you how often I use this in my conversations via text with my friends and my family. I use it at work. It is one of the best GIFs ever. It's very comical in the film, but I love it now because it's just so cheesy and it's so corny. I don't know. I love George Lucas, but I don't know what he was thinking with Darth Vader yelling no like that. Anyway, all right. Anyway. All right, let's go back here for a second. So now, after Vader finds out that Padme is dead, we know what Vader does literally the moments right after that. We don't see it in the film, but my homeboy Charles Soule, his Darth Vader comic, his 2017 Darth Vader comic, tells us what Vader did immediately following him rising from his birth as Vader, we'll say, in that armor. And Vader freaks out. He uses the Force to basically crush all those objects in that room. He actually, in the comic, uses the Force and throws Vader Sidious across the room. And Sidious quickly puts him in his place and is like, bro, step to me again and you're going to 100% regret it, which is such a dope moment. I love it. But then immediately after that, Sidious takes Vader and he basically tasks him with hunting down a Jedi. And he tells him, you have to find a Jedi, you have to kill that Jedi, and you're going to claim their lightsaber and the kyber crystal within, and then you're going to bleed that crystal and create your own lightsaber. And I absolutely love, let's make this bigger. I absolutely freaking love this moment in the comic. It's in the very first issue that it happens. Because basically we're seeing Masamida. He's bringing all these people outside of, I think it's outside of, at that point, it would have been the Imperial Palace, the former Jedi Temple. Pretty sure it's right outside the Jedi Temple. They're basically gathering up all these Jedi lightsaber hilts and they're burning them. And we see Masamida. He pulls up one of Yoda's numerous lightsabers. He tosses it into the furnace. It's the saber that Yoda loses in Revenge of the Sith. So Sidious is giving Vader this lesson. All right, let's go back here for a second. Come on. Sidious is giving Vader this lesson about what a Sith does to obtain their lightsaber, and he asks Vader if he understands, right? So again, he's saying, hey, you need to hunt down a Jedi. You need to kill them. You've got to claim their lightsaber and their kyber crystal, and you've got to bleed that crystal to be able to create your own Sith lightsaber. Do you understand? And we get this moment where, yes, the saber of a Sith is not given, it is taken. Which is so dope, because think about that. So that means, at least amongst the Rule of Two era Sith, possibly before then, every single Sith Lord would have had to have killed a Jedi in secret, stole their lightsaber, and then bled that kyber crystal for their lightsaber. I absolutely love that. I think that is so dope. That is like a billion times cooler than the explanation for red lightsabers in Legends. And I remember when people lost their minds when it was revealed that Sith bleed their kyber crystals to get their red lightsabers, as opposed to what happened in Legends. So in Legends, the reason that a Sith lightsaber is red is because they used synthetic crystals. Which is like, all right, yeah, like for the time, sure, that's interesting, that's cool. But to tell me that that's cooler than a Sith Lord hunting down a Jedi, killing him, stealing his lightsaber and his kyber crystal, bleeding it, pouring all of your hate and malice and pain into that kyber crystal to turn it into this red damaged crystal to get your Sith lightsaber. Tell me that's not cooler than a synthetic crystal that you could just get wherever. Sith Lord could create a synthetic crystal however. So much cooler the canon explanation for how a Sith gets their red lightsaber. Far cooler, way more badass. So Bullrun says a better way than in Legends, in my opinion, for getting red lightsabers. People just want to hate on it. Think it's Star Wars has always been scientific. I think a lot of times people, like you said, I think people just want to hate on Lucasfilm and Star Wars. If it's not exactly how it went in Legends, people lose their minds. Trey, welcome to the chat. Glad you're joining us, my man. So yeah, so to answer the question, Applegrid's question, did Anakin ever go to Padme's funeral? The answer is no. Because again, we know from Charles Soule's Darth Vader comic that immediately following him finding out that Padme had died, Vader tasked him with a mission to go find a Jedi that survived Order 66, kill that Jedi, take his lightsaber, bleed that crystal so that you could then have a Kyber crystal, or excuse me, a Sith lightsaber. And that's for a time in that comic, Vader's rocking a lightsaber from the Jedi Master Kirok Infila. I never know how to pronounce the Jedi Master's name. I've seen some people pronounce it differently. But man, I feel like I talk about that Charles Soule comic almost like weekly at this point in the Q&As. I love it. It's so good. Can't recommend it enough. If you're like not a super big comic reading fan, or if you dabble time to time and you haven't read that comic, go read that one. It is like 100% worth your time. It is so sick. It's so good. And just issue 1 starts off with, Sidious tasking Vader with going to kill a Jedi. So Bull Run says, I would say Legend diehards don't just hate to hate. They hate because to them, Star Wars is scientific, which is true in a way, but for some stuff, no. I don't know. I think it depends. I think everyone has their different reasons for not liking stuff. Sadly, I see a lot of negativity in the comments for my videos, and sometimes it's just really trivial things. Sometimes it's, hey, you did something different from how it was in Legends. I don't know. So I don't know why people hate the things that they hate or dislike the things that they don't, or that they dislike. But yeah, I remember when we learned that Sith bleed their Kyber crystals and people freaked out. I was like, geez, man, this new explanation is so much cooler than Legends. This is way, way more cool. So that is it for questions, my friends. I'm glad that although I wanted to do the Q&A on Tuesday, but I wasn't able to with my schedule, but I'm glad that we could at least do the Q&A before the end of the week. So Trey asks an excellent question. Could Jedi bleed crystals with the light side? So what they would do, they wouldn't bleed a Kyber crystal. They would purify it. So let's say, we'll use Ahsoka as an example. She's a perfect example. Ahsoka wound up getting her Kyber crystals from an Inquisitor, and those crystals were red. And so she used basically it would be like a purification ritual, I guess you would say. You're essentially going to be pouring light side energies into that crystal to heal it. Because again, you bleed that crystal. Let's say I'm a Sith Lord. I'm pouring all of my hate, all of my anger, all of my malice and hurt and pain and every negative emotion and feeling and thought that I have, I'm pouring that into the Kyber crystal with the Force, and that's what gives it that red hue, and that's what changes the color. The Jedi or the light side user, they're going to do the opposite of it. They're going to heal that Kyber crystal, and they're going to pour. I don't know exactly what the purification ritual is off the top of my head. I'm trying to remember. Do we see it in Ahsoka, I'm trying to remember. But yeah, they purify the crystal and basically it would be the opposite of what the Sith do. But it would be a little bit different, but similar sort of concept, we'll say, or practice. So yeah, and I like that idea. I like the idea that, think back to what Yoda tells Luke. Life creates the Force, right? So if we know as a Force user, whether they're a Sith or a Jedi, to be able to wield a lightsaber, you've gotta basically, you're funneling the Force through that kyber crystal. That's, I made a video about, or a short, I should say, about a Charles Soule comic, talking about how the Jedi preferred to use a lightsaber because not everyone could use a lightsaber. And people were losing their minds in the comment, like, it's a sword, anyone could use a sword. That's not the case, not in canon. You're to be able to really utilize a lightsaber effectively and to be able to master that. You're going to be channeling the Force through that kyber crystal to be able to maximize the use of that lightsaber. That's why a lot of times when we see non-Force sensitives wield lightsabers, they're kind of herky-jerky with their movements and with with how they're wielding that lightsaber. Yeah, they could turn it on and they could use it, but they're not going to be able to really use it effectively. So I say this because I like the idea that a kyber crystal is going to, it's technically like a living thing, so to speak, at least in terms of the Force, because it feels the Force and it could give off the Force. And I like the idea that, hey, the Sith, they corrupt it and they bleed and they hurt and damage that kyber crystal to get their lightsaber, as opposed to the Jedi, who when they find a bled lightsaber, or excuse me, a bled kyber crystal, they're going to purify it and they're going to heal it, because that's what the Jedi do. They work to heal and they work to do good across the galaxy. So I like that. I loved in the High Republic, Orla Jarini has a double-bladed lightsaber with purified kyber crystals. So her lightsaber is white. It's so dope. I love it. So yeah, I like that the Sith bleed their kyber crystals and the Jedi will purify them to heal them. Bullrun says that describes the Darksaber. Bro, I was literally just watching the episode 5 of the Book of Boba Fett. I get a 30-minute lunch break, so I was watching that first half of that episode during my lunch break. It's been probably a year since I watched that episode. I was like, yo, I'm so excited for The Mandalorian. Let me go watch that episode, because that episode was dope. I'm watching it and I'm like, yo, this episode is better than I remembered. It's so freaking good. And I loved seeing Din train with the Darksaber and how he is like fumbling to use it. Paz Vizsla is like fumbling and struggling. They're struggling to even lift the damn thing up. And I love that. And basically kind of what the armorer is telling Din sort of kind of aligns with what I was just saying, is that, hey, you need to you basically need to, she's not really saying you need to channel the Force, but she's basically saying you need to be mindful of your thoughts. You basically need to not fight against the power that the dark side, the Darksaber is giving off. But yeah, dude, I'm like so freaking pumped for The Mandalorian. I loved when Sabine, so Bullrun says when Sabine used it in Rebels, I was so excited. Like when they showed in season 3, I think it is, the episode where the Ghost Crew, they go to Dathomir and they find the damn Darksaber just like on a mantle. I was like jaw on the floor, like, oh my God, yes, this is so incredible. Hell yeah. So yeah, I'm like very excited for the return of The Mandalorian. Very excited to see our boy Din use the Darksaber again. I think our boy might be potentially drawing the attention of other Mandalorians with that Darksaber. So I think both good and bad attention will be given to Din from other Mandalorians. He might be getting some people that are going to align with him and want to work with him, and he may get some people that oppose him, because that Darksaber is a symbol of leadership of Mandalore. But that's a conversation for another day. Love the freaking Q&As, guys. I love doing this. I love chatting with you about Star Wars. I love answering your questions. Guys, I just freaking love Star Wars. But with that said, my friends, that's all the time I've got to answer questions for you. Let me know in the comments. Do you agree with anything that I said tonight? Do you disagree with anything that I said? Do you think this guy's a jabroni? He's talking out of his bun's hole? Let me know down in the comments. Loves hearing what you guys have to say, what your thoughts are. Now's the time, if you have not, like this video. Subscribe to Star Wars Transmissions. We do the weekly Q&A every single week. We got Mando dropping next week. Like I said before, I am so excited for The Mandalorian. Got shorts that drop on the regular, videos that are going to be coming out. I've got several in the hopper right now that I'm working on that are going to be coming out in the next couple days. So keep your eyes peeled for those. And follow Star Wars Transmissions on TikTok. Keep the party going. So support the channel, guys. As I said, now's a good time. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't. But with that said, I'm going to get ready. It's almost that time to hop on Halo and get my ass kicked in Halo. It's about close to that time. But with that said, my friends, may the Force be with you and stay nerdy.